Okay, good morning, and today is Tuesday, 26, 2019. Kokua Council. Do we have anyone from Kokua Council?
Yeah, Jim's here.
Hey, Jim.
Hey. We've identified a number of areas that relate directly or indirectly to, the facility issue, but also...
Just introduce yourself.
Oh.
Some of us know you, but
Okay.
audience might not.
I'm Jim Shaw. I'm president of Kokua Council, which is, I think, the oldest advocacy senior group in the state. And we meet monthly on every fourth Monday at Harris Church. You're all invited. Okay. We've identified a number of key areas in what is really an a la carte service delivery system. And the biggest group of people receiving services live in condos. And you mentioned consumer protection. As we look at this more and more seniors in condos, we've kind of concluded that the condo law is set up as if it were a number of investors meeting in an investor meeting with a group at the top that controls it all. But it might be better to think about this in the future as a vertical village. And the board of directors has taxing power over this village, and yet it's the only elected group that we allow proxies. In other words, voting by members of that community is often cut off, is often controlled by a small group, right? And we have, we have a lot of condo dwellers, seniors, who are slowly slipping into early dementia, other issues. They are not the best in holding off financial abuse or even following it. We have examples of people losing their homes. And again, I go back to the notion of the horizontal property regime is a model for a corporate investor group and not for a village or a community. And maybe we should be moving in the direction of understanding that a community of several hundred in some cases, right, they are controlled, they are taxed internally without a lot of consumer protection. And we have a group on in our association that is like a subgroup that's been working on this. They've been lobbying you. There are bills. So I just wanted to mention that notion that this is a huge area and probably a lot more people in the condos that are vulnerable than outside of the condos. Okay. Second, the prosecutors are going to come in this year and ask for increasing the penalties for elder abuse. They know, and we all know, this is going to increase their workload. They're going to need appropriations to do this as well. It won't be just enough, tighten it, increase the penalties, and now they got a lot more on their plate, and they won't be able to handle it, right? So please consider that there has to be appropriations to go with this. Now there are two other little warning signs that have been brought up about unintended consequences. If you increase the penalties for these outside predators, yeah, great. But consider a family member who has to decide, I don't like what Uncle's doing, but if I blow the whistle, do I want to send him to jail for 5 years? Would there actually be an unintended reluctance if you don't make the distinction between outside predators and others? I don't have an answer for this, but it is clearly one of those nuances. When you increase penalties, are you going to discourage reporting of those who have close relationships? Clearly the predator issue from outside family, yes, right? Appropriations, yes. Be cautious of, will I blow the whistle on Uncle, right? Because it might not happen. The third area is that in an a la carte system, obviously, we are delivering services to nonprofits. Late payments are still an issue. Now, if you were to do a study and say, we will cough up what we really owed to all, some of these vendors who, it's not 30 days, it's sometimes a year before they get paid. That would be a cost to the state, you're all going to run in the other direction. We understand that. But what if we started with reporting annually, counties and others, on date the invoice is submitted, date the payment is made. Let's track how much this is an issue, right? I also know for the departments that when a department is late, right, there's no dispute it's late, the computer automatically generates a check. But what's different is every department gets to define what late means. Ooh, you didn't check this box. We're not going to start the clock, right? So if you're a very wealthy, big organization, we know some small organizations that had to borrow $700,000 just to keep staff on. The big ones have lines of credit with the banks because the state of Hawaii and the counties, and this law applies to the counties, do not pay in time. This is a weakness in our system. And when you get into the issue of recruiting workforce, am I going to have a job in November? Can I count on it? Right? We don't even have a contract that says how much we're going to get every single month. This is our experience with members and others that have told us what goes on. Some of the daycare people, do you ever get paid in 30 days? No. Right. So, yeah, you could look in the past, right? But maybe the more proactive and positive way, let's start tracking it, right? Let's start doing it. I don't think there's ever been a report to you, ever, on late payments in the state. So that's important. Early onset dementia is often not necessarily recognized directly in our prepaid system, right? Now, we know in the past, and I think Senator Baker and others have been involved, we amended the insurance law to include these kinds of benefits. That's very important. And by way of an important presentation we had yesterday, the relationship of early dementia diagnosis and hearing loss is very strong. And I'm not sure that hearing aids and diagnosis are being covered by prepaid, right? And by the way, I'm sure nobody qualifies for this, but you start losing your hearing at about 55, right? So nobody covered by this now?
Go ahead.
Nobody's covered by this.
Representative, I'm sorry, go ahead, please continue.
No, nobody's covered necessarily by this now. The earlier you get involved, what we've learned is that when you lose hearing, a part of the brain shrinks and doesn't come back. Right. And we know that isolation is very much a part of consumer protection and whatnot. When you can't hear what's going on in the noisy room, you stop going to the meetings. Right. So we are becoming much more sensitive to not only the early dementia issues, but the relationship of hearing. The human voice, music, all that are known to really help people with dementia and Alzheimer's as well. So this issue of hearing and hearing aids and availability, this affects so many of us, and we're so proud not to admit it, maybe. But it is a serious issue of the ability of consumers to stand up for themselves, whether it's in aging in place or not. I did want to mention you had a great meeting on palliative care, and it was noted that Medicare now, under the guise of palliative care, is paying for the same stuff as Kokua care. So, you know, I think we recommended at the time, start marinating our law with this word that Medicare recognizes, and maybe they'll pay for the same stuff. Right. Also, the caregiver bill, the caregiver law. Obviously, we have limited funds for this, right? And we have done it without priorities. Walk in the door whenever. Maybe somebody whose loved one needs services more, maybe they're a priority, we're not sure. But, you know, if you just added more money to Kokua care, you'd have less bureaucracy and get the most. What is the purpose of this law? It's to keep people in the workforce, right? So is there a priority profile of the caregiver? If you're 66 years old, about to retire, right, are you the ideal person we're going to give this extra service money to, because you're going to retire anyway, right? But if you're in your 50s and you're caregiving, right, you might calculate that profile might benefit for more extended involvement in the workplace if they were a priority. To date, I don't think we've attempted to prioritize the caregiver with limited funds. You know, one comes in, they're 70, one comes in, they're 50. You look at the circumstances and whatnot, and you might say, this one is more likely to benefit from the purpose of this program, right? Otherwise, without the prioritization, you're just adding more criteria for the same services, right? You might as well just put more money into component care, right? You don't have to calculate, are you working 30 hours a week or whatever, right? So we think that as you move forward, knowing you have limited funds, how are you going to prioritize that? It's not easily done. The heart will ring out to those whose seniors need it the most, maybe. But this is for the caregiver that is more likely to stay there. And then the early dementia and the hearing aids we mentioned. So these are all that, in some ways, in an a la carte world, do relate to what's going on in condos, it's going on in the aging in place, it's going on in all of these, and the ability of the care receiver to stand up for their own consumer rights. So I think you were quite right, Mr. Chairman, when you said this is really about consumer protection, right? And so we, you know, if you look at communities, villages, condos, and whatnot, how can we retweak some of these laws so that the democracy and the financial abuse is less likely? A small group that really gets in on the board of directors can't control it all. We know we've got a problem with management associations that are not required to be licensed, right? That's a consumer protection. So we have educated ourselves that the lens of consumer protection may be the more potent one for a lot of these issues. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. I did, Representative Shawn. Members, Senator Baker knows, a good old Jim Shawn used to be the chair of the Health Committee on the House side, and that's why he gave us a full spectrum of kapuna care. So I wanted to thank you for being here and being a resource for us. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you.
We may have questions,
Great.
but oh, and by the way, I didn't want to take the credit. My good colleague and friend, Chair Baker, was the one that actually initiated the palliative and hospice care briefing that we had. I thought it was excellent.
It was excellent.
So,
it was
yeah,
excellent.
I don't want to take her credit. So
She gets credit.
thank you.
I just double checked. I wanted to see if Medicare covered hearing aids. They do not. Basic Medicare does not.
Yeah.
Some of the Medicare Advantage plans do. So there's some work to be done in that particular area.
That's right. And for prepaid, while you're still working, that's where the insurance law we might look at that. Yeah.
Well, and if I recall, I think my colleague, Senator Baker, had a bill to cover medical devices, and one of them was hearing aids.
That's correct.
So,
Did it pass?
no.
Pardon?
Oh.
No. Well,
It
we'll bring
didn't move all the way.
Oh, okay.
we're going to try to move it in 2020.
Excellent.
And
Thank
Peter
you.
will continue to be an advocate for that.
Right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony.